I'm Mark Dresner, and this is the Research Insider, a special interview series featuring experts and leaders in consumer, market, and shopper insights. The Research Insider is brought to you by OmniShopper 2015, formerly the annual Shopper Insights in Action Conference, uniting the world's top manufacturers and retailers to activate intelligence and drive basket growth. For more information about OmniShopper 2015, visit us online at www.omnishopperevent.com. Joining us today is Jonathan MacDonald. Now, he's a change and disruption expert and authority and the founder of the Thought Expansion Network. Jonathan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, now you get quite a bit of face time with CEOs in retail as well as at major manufacturers and really across the entire Fortune class portfolio. So I want to talk a little bit about change and kind of what's on their mind. And the first thing that I'd like to talk about is what does the speed of change look like for retail right now? What does it feel like?
I think the important thing to think about change in terms of speed is that today's the slowest pace of change we'll ever experience. So the last 10 years of change, which seems quite a lot if you think about what's launched in the last 10 years, from the iPhones, the iPad, to people wanting to look at prices on their phones in store, which has reduced the revenue in the largest retailers in the world in terms of comparison shopping. Then the massive growth of Amazon and Play.com and Alibaba launching, floating, turning over $5 billion in a day in November last year. All of these things happened in the last 10 years, which is not dissimilar to the speed of change in the next 5. So, and then in the next 5 years, the speed of change in the next 2 will be the same as that. So the speed of change accelerates, yeah. So the interesting thing about change is that it's not for the faint-hearted. The speed of it is something that we could never get used to because it accelerates. And it means that things are extraordinarily unpredictable. And so new technologies that have disrupted companies in the last decade are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of new technologies that will disrupt companies in the next 5 years. And that can be any companies, from the market leaders through to the small incumbents. At the end of the day, change happens to us all. And we tend to not necessarily like change when it happens, and then we try and resist.
Yeah, why are we resistant to change then?
Well, I think that change is the enemy of the competent. So people who are really competent at things are the people that hate change the most. So, you know, I like speaking on stage in English, and if 5 minutes before I went on stage someone said you need to do it in Swedish, I'd resist. I'm good at speaking in English, just about. And so having something disruptive like a language change wouldn't work for me, which is exactly the same as the new technologies that are affecting retail. You're dealing with companies with maybe 1 million employees who have got huge market share, all of a sudden being competed with by 3 guys or 3 girls in a garage somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And this type of potential disruption from change is something that is obviously rejected out of hand by those that are extremely competent and comfortable in their existing success.
Right, right. And there's, so what are the main ways of leveraging change then, if we're going to look at that?
Well, the first part, I think, in general, to think about any concept is to understand exactly what it feels like, what it looks like, what it smells like. And once we've actually based an understanding of the changes that are around us, i.e. understanding the modern contexts, understanding the modern landscape, what's happening now, rather than predicting what's happening next, actually looking at what the macro issues are that are happening now, such as people's lack of desire for ownership, the increased disintermediation of business models, such as Uber in the taxi industry, Airbnb in the hotel industry, Spotify in the music industry, 3D printing in the retail industry. First, the understanding could be the basis, and the second part then is to actually see how we can act disruptively against ourselves sometimes, and also act in ways that, or structure our strategies in ways that can actually move with the speed rather than against it. And the third part would then be perpetually doing that. Mm-hmm. So once we've actually based the understanding level, then we can actually strategize for disruption, because it happens anyway. We can either be with it or against it. And the third part would then be to manage that perpetual cycle of change, which has to accelerate. So rather than having one change management moment, we have to manage perpetual change always.
So in a large monolithic type of a company
I know a few of those.
that is running, that is let's say a master of efficiency, right? These companies have distilled excellence, and you're talking about actually being, sort of subverting that then in a way, right, and turning it into being continuously adaptable.
Yeah, it's permanently flexible. So if you look at Amazon, about 15 years ago so 2015 when we're recording this, around about 2001, Amazon were the largest online book retailer. Physical books, paper books with ink. And so the very last thing you would think they would do would be to create e-ink and then what became the Kindle. But the thing is they viewed the landscape. They looked at the capability and the affordability of technology and took a view and thought, right, it's likely that this will disrupt us at some stage. So why don't we fast forward that and be the people that disrupt us ourselves? In the same way as the iPhone, to the public view, the iPhone obviously preceded the iPad. The reality was the iPad innovation preceded the iPhone internally. And so they realized that obviously you release a smart device that's an internet browser, a communicator, and everything else, like the media device, music player as they called it. And then the next thing would be bigger and bigger and bigger iPhones. So they actually created the iPad first, that would theoretically disrupt their laptop market, would launch the iPhone first, then launch the iPad. And of course the laptop market has fallen, but the tablet market has gone through the roof. So disrupting yourself is extremely fortuitous career move. And it's very, very rare to happen, but those companies with tens of billions of dollars in cash have done so, all of them.
Now, you talk with companies all the time, you're consulting with companies, you're talking with people at the very highest levels. What is the reaction typically when you show people what is taking place in the landscape? Are they able to recognize things that will be very likely threats at some point, and do they change?
Well, I have to have quite a thick skin in what I do, but less so now because I tend to only help companies that are willing. Whereas in my earlier days in my career, I went to any company and tried to convince them of the world as they didn't know it. So now the common response, I get hired in by people that know there's something other. But in general, yeah, the reaction depends on how you phrase the context of the modern landscape. If you walk around pointing fingers and saying, you're going to lose out if you don't do this, the natural physiological response to that is rejection. If, however, you just portray a picture and you enable people to draw their own conclusions, but you give enough signposts. So it's like if you drive down a street and you could stop and say, you have to go this way, which is kind of very ineffective, versus going down the street and there's various signposts that people can choose there. And we're dealing with intelligent people. And these intelligent people also have egos sometimes. And at the end of the day, we prefer to find our own conclusions rather than be forced. However, if a chief exec or a group of execs say to me, we need you to tell us the top 4 things that are going to massively disrupt our marketplace, my first statement is, or question is, are you ready to hear what I'm going to say? Like, genuinely. Would you build what I said into a strategy and execute it? Or not? Because if you wouldn't, then there's no reason for me to send you an invoice and me to fly to your office. Make no sense. But if you're actually going to apply this, then let's go. And IKEA is an example where a very brave chief exec, very willing board of executives, very innovative culture, very focused. They asked me to actually show them what the future could look like and what they need to do internally for an innovation process. And they then applied exactly that. And so IKEA are the forefront of investing into 3D printing technology internally for their production, externally for the consumers. What they do with digital interfaces is exemplary, and it's largely based on the will and the skill of the senior exec team. Whereas you have other companies like Nokia or Kodak or others that I've tried to help, especially Kodak, showing them the camera phones back in the early days, 2001, 2002. And they said, well, but these are 0.1, 0.2 megapixel cameras. There's nothing that we could ever be disrupted by. And that's, it's a shame that, 150 months later, they're filing for Chapter 11.
Yeah. So now, I will make no guarantee that people will act on it, but I want to ask you the question anyway. What are the three biggest changes then that you see in retail? Yeah, what are the disruptions?
I think the major disruption will be the maker movement, the ability for people to produce their own things. What we're seeing at the moment is second one of minute one of day one. We're looking at the MakerBots technologies and the Stratasys technologies and the Foodini technologies as something which we in our heads think, yeah, but that's never going to disrupt us. Which is exactly the same as looking at a 0.2 megapixel camera phone that can take 4 photos and think, well, these are way too expensive, they're not capable enough.
And that's always the case, isn't it? Yeah.
So the maker movement is massive. Yeah. I think the second movement is blockchain technology. And blockchain technology underwrites peer-to-peer currencies. And so we will very, very shortly be in, I mean, if you look, Expedia take Bitcoins now, Amazon will soon do, peer-to-peer currencies will be the fastest rising currencies in the world. So retailers will be in a situation within 5 years, I'd say, at least, where they are going to be banking non-bankable currencies. And so that's fairly disruptive, depending on your view of what your financial architecture is. And the third, I think the greatest disruption that will happen in retail is away from the maker movement and peer-to-peer currencies, is the potentially the split between retailers that can actually go more artisan and create things that people care about manually, farm to table type things, versus retailers who essentially commoditize themselves and vortex themselves into zero. And so, ironically, the third final disruption is this constant race for the bottom to be the cheapest supplier of products and not concentrate on artisan, concentrate on procurement. At the same time as change 1 and 2 means that those retailers will most certainly be out of business.
What do retailers need to start doing today in order to be competitive tomorrow?
Not be as comfortable. Be brave enough to take chances and light small fires rather than place big bets. And with that, I think we're talking about iterative cycles of testing, learning and improving, rather than what actually happens is, let's invest $100 million into this massive idea and hope that it works. And the environment in this day and age isn't suitable for that, and it's becoming less suitable by the second.
And what would you see, or what would you say are some of the biggest mistakes or misconceptions that you're seeing?
I think, in no particular order, one of the really common ones is basing future potential on past success. So we look at the next 10 years and think, well, the last 10 years we grew by X%, therefore the next 10 years will grow by X%. And that's nuts. So that's really common. The second thing that's really common is that we don't invest into innovation processes. We hire someone who's a global head of innovation, we give them a tiny budget, and then expect them to overperform against our P&L. Never going to happen. And the third is we assume that we know everything that we need to know. Whereas there's 1% of stuff we know, 1% of stuff we know we don't know, and 98% of stuff we don't know. And the lack of investment and energy into the 98% is alarming and pandemic and indicative of the market dynamics, which mean that in the next 10 years, 70+% of the companies that we know of today won't be around.
One final question, and this is a little bit redundant, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
How can we expect, or how should, or how does the company keep up with that accelerating pace of change?
Well, a lot of companies that do it successfully build in that accelerant to their processes. Strategies that take 6 days to create and 6 weeks to launch rather than 6 months to create and 18 months to launch is a practical example. Build cycles of 1.5 years in this speed of change means that you will launch things that are out of date, for sure. So very practically, shorter strategic to execution cycles is massive. Secondly, splitting the P&L away from standard logic. So you'd look at P&L and think, right, innovation is purely red figures. It's just loss, like marketing. Loss. The reality is that those things are absolutely imperative to be invested into. And so if you split the P&L and don't see innovation against your current exploitation. So the exploration actually split away from current exploitation in terms of our mindset of figures is absolutely critical. Otherwise what happens is we invest in something, it didn't work in 6 weeks or 10 weeks. We look at our massive figures of profit and think this innovation's never going to match these profit figures, therefore we kill the innovation. So profit P&L split is massive. So first is faster strategic cycles, second is P&L split, and the third, absolutely most important point of all, that overshadows everything, is hiring people at the most senior position who have the greatest courage and the greatest will and the least comfort. Because as the Japanese say, fish rots from the head. So after everything I've said in this interview, if the person who makes the decisions and signs the check doesn't believe, it's not going to happen anyway. So we actually need to put into place the people with that courage and that will and that vision. Otherwise the game's already lost. It's just a matter of time until when.
Jonathan, you've given us so much to think about. Thank you for joining us
Good luck
today.
out there. Cheers. Thanks, mate.
And that concludes this episode of the Research Insider. I'm Mark Dresner, and you've just heard the Insight Scoop.